Our next presenter is Keith Karnes. Keith has worked in forestry on Indian lands for 14 years. The last 12 years were at Leech Lake Reservation. He is responsible for all aspects of forest-related work at Leech Lake, including reforestation, fuels, prescribed understory burns, TSI, and much more. In recent years, Keith has worked much more closely with Chippewa National Forest to ensure tribal treaty rights are enforced on their projects, with a large emphasis on climate change. Keith Karnes.
I got to preface this, I'm so nervous. I've never talked to a group this size even. I usually talk to people that are 6 or 8 people in a room. I don't know if there's anybody here that manages tribal lands or manages lands adjacent to tribal lands. I don't know if you've heard of the TFPA Act, but where I come from in Minnesota, the TFPA is the Tribal Forest Protection Act, and it deals with adjacent landowners. And you can see here, the green is the Chippewa National Forest, and the orange color is the Leech Lake Reservation. It's got a phenomenal overlap. There's about 800 some odd acres inside the Leech Lake Reservation, and the Chippewa National Forest is in charge of 80% of them, something like that. So, we got the headwaters. We got 3 of the biggest lakes in Minnesota. The Mississippi River runs through Cass Lake, Winnibigoshish, comes down this way. So it's a pretty important area in Minnesota. We had an issue on the tribe. The tribe felt like they were being marginalized, that the wood that was in the wood basket that was for the reservation was continually being harvested, and that there was a lot of young species, early pioneer species that were in there. And if you look at it, 2 of the biggest mills in Minnesota, you got Grand Rapids and Bemidji. Bemidji's got the largest stud mill in Minnesota, and Grand Rapids has a large paper mill. So one is taking care of pine, one is taking care of aspen, which are the 2 800-pound gorillas that are on the reservation. And the circles, they indicate a 50-mile radius, which is like the prime harvest, radius that a mill wants to get wood from. And this was shown to me at a mill tour, and I got wondering where the reservation fit in all that. And I tell you couldn't hardly fit it in between that overlap any better than what it is. So what is the Tribal Forest Protection Act? It's federal legislation that was brought, it was signed into by Congress in 2004. And it started out west here. There were reservations that were doing good fuels management. They were spacing their pine trees, doing all good work. And nothing against any BLM employees here. But there was work that was not being done on BLM lands, and a fire would start, and it would rage across, and then it would still impact the tribal lands. So that was the impetus of it. I would submit that somebody in their eminent wisdom put a small caveat in there for ecosystem restoration as well, which is where we usually invoke it. We don't have major forest fires, many in northern Minnesota. We've done now 4 TFPA projects that we've gotten approved by. We need to write the letter. It goes to the Forest Service, our local Forest Service, the Chippewa National Forest staff. From there, they need to send it to their regional staff. Then they need to approve it. So we have 4 that are approved. There were 2 red and white pine thinning ones that I'll get into, a pilot and a full scale. There was a Snowshoe Hare Habitat expansion project, which I was happy to see was another topic today, and an aspen one. Now my understanding is aspen, I don't know if it's different out here. We have too much aspen. I don't know, I think you guys don't have enough. By all means, come take some of ours. So, and we're just dipping our toes into the aspen one right now, but the other 2 are up and going. And we've talked about a lot of it. It does build on this trust, this interagency trust, I've had discussions with the Chippewa National Forest staff about doing some out-year ones, and we're holding off on them right now to see, are they truly going to get it? I don't know if Lee is still here, but the National Forests, understanding the tribal way of life, there's a lot of headbutting goes on there, and there shouldn't be. The biggest things we needed, I needed my bosses to agree with me. There's a lot of tribal members on the Leech Lake Reservation that don't want any more wood cut. I had to tell them, if you want an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. So I explained it to them, and how was it going to happen? It was going to happen through stewardship contracting. And like I said, the red pine and the white pine spruce thinning was one that we did a pilot project first, and we actually did the Snowshoe pilot project as well. It was met with some resistance by some. It was embraced by others. I think that's just a natural way of things. Our pilot project for our TFPA pine thinning, we looked at a stand that was, we were going from 20 to 40. We pushed it into 25 and 35-year-old, and we wanted to start small. I mean, there have been a lot of large acreages talked today. This one was just 2 cutting units. It was 43 acres, but the basal area, it exceeded 200. I mean, you can see that's just thick, The tribe, red pine back in pre-settlement or, a few hundred years ago, the red pine would get large. They would be a super canopy tree that survived some sort of disturbance, usually a fire of some sort. And they're not allowed to do that in this kind of condition. The live crown ratios, they get small, and they just don't work well for becoming a large tree. And then, climate change, I know there's a few that talked about that. The idea of a monoculture stand for climate change, having the desire to diversify your stands, to hedge your bets as best you can. And that would be a fire risk that is in a fire-dependent system. So we went in and we thinned out about 1/3 of the stand. And you can see, I like this picture because the sun's shining. It's kind of like those voting commercials you get nowadays. It just seems happier. And we learned some. You can see we took, according to that, we took 430 cords out. So this was something that was a concern by industry, us wanting to do this. But we told them what we're actually calling for is to thin early, thin often, and thin aggressively. We want to retain the live crown. These are already pushing. Are they going to have enough as they age out? I think they're still fine. We would change some of this. It's kind of hard to tell on this picture, but we did a lot of row thinning and just plucking from in between the rows. The ones we're moving on now in the larger project, we're looking at variable density as well. So we had a lot of talk about what exactly is a healthy forest. And you can go to different agencies. You can sit in my agency, and your answers are just they're gonna run the whole gambit. They're all over the place. I've been told by a lot of other foresters the second that sentence. I need to remember my silviculture. Because everybody wants the trees to be healthy, but I would say, a truly healthy system has a lot of trees that are either dead or down, somewhere in between. And so we've had a lot of discussion over that. What we run into with our Aspen regeneration, doesn't that make you guys jealous right there? That's where we get into the Snowshoe Hare idea. It's all vertical. I don't know as much about snowshoe, but I would wager, as it's starting to self-thin there, that it's probably getting less palatable to snowshoe hare for cover. One thing my wildlife co-worker told me is, he says snowshoe hare are stupid. They think you can't see them, so they'll get out in that there and they'll just sit there and do nothing. Even if there is no snow on the ground and they're pure white, And that could be part of the reason their numbers are declining. And like I said, there's a tendency to always want to harvest the juvenile species. You know, we harvest aspen. When I first started, they were harvesting aspen at 55 years old. Now it's already dropped down to 40 years old just because that's industry demand. And a forest, I mean, to get a full forest structure, to get all the multi-components that you got to have in there, you can't do that in 40 years. So it's become an issue. Our wildlife guy gave me this. He loves coarse woody debris. He says a dead tree is just coming into its own. You know, and these are pictures he took off the Chippewa National Forest, but there's not a whole ton of this. He likes the idea of blowdown. Him and I have discussions about how much of that right there we want, you know, with all the conifers around it. But it is good habitat for snowshoe hare. Stand replacement fires, we don't have many of them. Most of them are prescribes that top out here and there. We allow it to mimic nature as best we can. Probably the wrong crowd to be talking about wildfires, but like I said, we don't have many of them. And then he would ask, is this hare habitat? There's one right there, hiding. Now, if that was that aspen stand from a couple slides ago, he'd be a goner. So, and what we did on our TFPA pilot project was looking at, if you would, this is a cedar stand. That's a stand where the rabbit was before. And they live well in there because they got plenty of cover and everything, but as you radiate out, modern logging practices, you know, to utilize everything that you can, they're not leaving any of that coarse woody debris, not leaving enough of it. What they leave for slash just gets pushed down to the ground, so it's too low. It just doesn't work. So our wildlife guy is saying, you know, you got to create more of these hiding spots in the secondary habitat. And then if there was a cedar stand over here, maybe you can work on connectivity. So, you know, the snowshoe hare can have more hiding spots, move over this way, get into here and do what rabbits do and create more rabbits. So this is a better illustration of it, really. You know, I mean, they can go from high quality habitat from one spot to the other. This is the pilot project we did. I know it's a very busy looking thing, but we're looking, there's some older aspen here, you know, that we can, he's talked about blowing the tops out of them, creating some snags, leaving the tops on the ground. Same thing here. There's a large spruce stand. That's actually spruce too. You know, where we would probably do some row thinning and leave windrows in there. And they're finding up here in this cedar is where they got snowshoe hare. But if we can get a corridor, there's a nice cedar stand down here as well. So the project's going to be designed to do some work in this area to see if it works. Our red pine white spruce project, this is where we're at with it today, is now we have formed a collaborative. There's all of the white spruce is in white, all of the red pine is in red. There was almost 16,000 acres of red pine and white spruce between the ages of 20 and 40 that were overdense, located inside the Chippewa National Forest, and a lot of it was inside the reservation. You can see there's a very heavy concentration of red pine right here. That became the Sand Plains Pines project that we're working on right now. Right there. So this is a zoom in of it. We have very little lands in there. We got a little bit way up in the corner here. The Forest Service has a lot of them, and then there's also the state, which, now somebody asked earlier today how you can tell if your collaborative is a success. I was at a regional or a local forestry meeting last week where we were brought to term on this project by industry and other potential stakeholders. They weren't sure because it was scary what we were asking them to do, you know. We want to time out some stands into, instead of economic rotation, we want to push towards ecologic rotation. We want to thin it early, and there's some hesitancy, for them to get on board. But there was a state guy who works for our local regional office. A light went on in his head, and he said, "Well, it sounds like it's a win for everybody. Industry's going to get a lot of wood, which they're pining for. The tribe is going to get some return back to not pre-settlement conditions, but more of an ability, a direction heading towards an old growth aesthetic. State and the feds are going to get all kinds of fuels brushing work done, So everybody's happy about it. We were calling for going in and thinning multiple times. That was something that the Forest Service had never considered. They do a 10-year management plan, and then there was one thin in there, and then they got to wait 10 years again to do it. We're saying that's not enough. You need to go and do it earlier. We have a huge hazel problem where it just comes up thick as peanut butter. So the goals, to improve the diversity. A lot of these red pine stands, they were supposed to be jack pine, which is, somebody figured, long before I ever started there, that red pine it's worth more to industry, so they planted red pine. And we've kind of told the Forest Service, you made that cake. Now you got to eat it. If you wanted jack pine, then you could have harvested them, mimicking a forest fire after 40 years. But now we're going to time some of this out to 200, 250 years. Because if jack pine was desired species number 1, red pine would easily be 1A. Doing that, we're going to keep some aspen. We're going to convert some aspen to more of the fire-dependent pine. We're going to have oak. Oak are going to be coming up. Birch are going to be remaining in the system. We're going to get a true woodlot-looking system, what it should be. The Forest Service mantra, I don't know it exactly. It's got to have is it a healthy forest, a diverse, sustainable, and productive? Anybody? Something like that? That's the mission statement. We've run into people, well, you got to have trees to harvest. It's got to be as productive as it can be. And I said, well, productive, when you get into multiple use, what is productivity? There's a lot of tribal members that would just as soon eat blueberries. There's a lot of wildlife that prefer the snags. Having oaks in there, there's a lot of them that'll eat the oak mast. Lessons we've learned to date on this. If you don't get support from your collaborators, it's going to be dead in the water. We've pushed hard for it. That one guy that spoke right before the break, he hit spot on a lot of this stuff. I don't know where he's at now, but trust. We talked about that even over break. There is a lot of mistrust from the tribe to the Chippewa National Forest because of that marginalization. Trust is fickle. We're trying hard to trust. It's a little easier for me. I'm not a tribal member, but I see that in my boss. My boss is a tribal elder who spent his whole life on the reservation, and he wrestles with it. He wrestles with the idea, is it rhetoric or is it genuine? And we didn't want to overload anybody to start with, so we started small. A project where everybody can kind of dip their toes into it and feel like it's comfortable. That's where, it was rewarding to me personally when the light kind of went on in that guy's head. Because the state, they're scared to work with the tribe. They think we're up to something. So, but we're thinking, and we're moving it all out towards a holistic idea. We're trying to just get it ingrained in. We won't get it in every Forest Service person's head. We'll get it in some. Same with the state. But if we can get a buy-in, if this project can work, and then it's going to grow and it's going to expand. And I do think it's a win for everybody. Our relationship is better than it's ever been with the Forest Service. I know when I first started, we'd have like a 10-person table, and we'd come in there to sit down and have meaningful consultation. Somebody today said that whereas the decision was already made when they come in to talk to us, so that's not consultation. But now we go in there and we joke, we have a good time, but then we get down to business. And I didn't know how to finish, so I found this poem. So I hope that was good. I hope it helped a little bit. Any questions? Can I do questions?
Thank you, Keith. That was wonderful. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Keith?
So Keith, I'm struck by the amount of water there is on the reservation.
Yes.
And, because everything you talked about, thinking about the relationship between forests and hydrology, does your collaborations involve working with people who are involved in the sport fishery community, or involved with the wild rice harvest, or things like that? Does that come into the kinds of work you do in forestry?
The water inside the reservation, the tribe has jurisdiction over it. We stock walleye, they do that for walleye, and wild rice is, it may be the most sacred thing on the reservation. So we work with people some on that, but not too overly much. I know they work with the state on fisheries, and that seems to go pretty good. Like I said, I'm not the wildlife guy, but they seem to work pretty hand in hand on that stuff.
Tagging onto that question, since your water table is so much higher and you have a variety of projects you're trying to manage here, what are the go-to methods of harvesting? Is it mostly chainsaws and hand crews, or is it Timcos, or?
Oh, it's regular. I mean, it's regular logging equipment. I mean, we get conventional or cut to length, either system going out there. We have, I would say 90% of what we cut is in winter only. It's got to be frozen. Yes, yes. The big project area, the Sand Plains Pine, that's in a high fire dependent system. That's going to be a lot of summer logging, which is a huge selling point for the project itself.
You mentioned using traditional ecological knowledge. How do you go about collecting that information? Is it a concerted effort, or are you just kind of gathering it as you talk to people?
I look at it myself as it's a better grasp on a holistic idea, realizing that everything plays a little part. I had one of my counterparts told me, if you look off to the side, you see 3 little birch trees out there, and everybody's going to look at them like they're garbage. But then you walk downtown in a tribal community and you see 3 little guys sitting on a bench. And if you can make that mental leap, that it's really not that different, and taking a look at what they call scrub oak that a logger just wants to run over, but the scrub oak could be cover for me as a hunter, could be cover for the deer as a prey. It's food for deer and turkey and everything and stuff, looking at it in that whole grand scheme of things instead of, I want to cut all those trees and that's it. That's my take on traditional ecological knowledge.
Yeah, in regards to white pine, I grew up with that in northern Michigan and Wisconsin. And just wondered if that feeds into any of your management, where that is.
Just about all of it. A lot of those where we're going to let the red pine time out and start reaching into the canopy, we're going to end up moving away from a little bit of fire, certain spots where we're not going to allow it. In every single one of those, bar none, our native plant community classification says white pine will be coming in and white spruce will be coming in and into the understory and moving up. That was a lot of what was lost back when the timber barons came through back in the early 1900s.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith. We really appreciate that.